Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Well, it's great to be here again, and I appreciate my connection with the community over a lot of years. And I appreciate the connection even with the origins of GBF, which I had a connection with because it came out of our Summer Institute with the Buddhist Peace Fellowship in the early 90s, and that I was one of the organizers of. And so that's another story, but it's good to be here and good to connect, see a lot of familiar faces. And so this morning I want to explore with you the theme of bringing our practice to the current difficult times. To do that comprehensively, we'll stay here for the next week. To do it in a way which hopefully could be helpful, but won't be fully comprehensive, I'll talk for half an hour. And really to explore a few key themes. And what I want to do is focus on the importance of connecting inner transformation and outer transformation. That's one theme. A second theme is grounding in ethics as part of our practice. Sometimes a missing part of our practice with so much emphasis on meditation, which I love. So the second piece, I'll be a good chunk of what I talk about, is how we ground in ethics and expand our sense of ethics as a core part of our practice. And then also some attention to two key dimensions of inner work. One, working with difficult emotions and thoughts. And the next one is keeping a connection to joy in difficult times. Very, very crucial. And the last will be really listening for what calls one at these times. So maybe probably adds up to 5 themes. Maybe 4. Okay. Traditionally, as many of us know, in the teachings of the Buddha, the training is understood as taking place in 3 areas. In Pali, sometimes called Sila, Samadhi, Panya, often translated in a little different order as training in wisdom, training in meditation, and training in ethics. Something very similar in the Tibetan tradition. In some of the Tibetan traditions, the breakdown of is also in 3 areas of training. Training in view, which corresponds to wisdom, view, meditation, and conduct. Some of you may have heard that model. And this is really how it's understood traditionally, that all 3 of these areas are crucial. And as probably many of us have observed, in Western Buddhist practice, sometimes that threefold mode of training is reduced primarily to meditation. with maybe some help with wisdom and occasional comments on ethics. But there's really, I know this myself from my own experience, that there's, and I love meditation. I've probably spent, 8 or 9 years of my life in retreat over the years. So I love meditation, but I'm also aware that there's been a kind of narrowing of the sense of training. And even, a lot of community groups, they're called, what are they called? They're called meditation groups, right? And it's very valuable and I think understandable partly in terms of how Western Buddhism developed. But it's not really so much in keeping with the tradition. And I know I had some resistance to it because I was probably more of an activist. I was more of an activist before I got into meditation. Might be true for many of us. And I always thought, oh, so wonderful to bring them together, right? That was kind of vision. And I was frustrated sometimes being on retreats and being when I was, in my 20s and learning meditation, to really have, almost like the message was, meditate all the time. That's where the action is, And I found resistance to that, and I actually moved away from some of the mainstream centers, and from around 1990 to 2000, my main home was the Buddhist Peace Fellowship, actually, and really finding a place to make that connection and working with training groups and so forth, and then found I was missing retreats and intensive practice, and since then I've worked more continually for an integration, but I have really felt for a long time the need for connecting inner and outer transformation. I think it's a message that's really important in our times, and for us to find ways to make that connection. And it's not something we do all the time. Sometimes, I know this from my own life, sometimes I'm more called to the inner work, or to retreats, or to meditation. And sometimes I'm more called to the outer, or to integrating the inner and the outer. So there are cycles of inner and outer. A key dimension here is having what we might call ethical training, and our commitment to, it really comes down to not causing harm and repairing harm. It's one way to talk about it, and preventing harm from happening. Or how can our commitment to ethics be more of a part of our practice? And I recognize that ethics is a kind of a slippery word. It may not do justice to what we're talking about. One friend, Nathan Glyde, who lives in England, he talks about this area as a commitment to care. And we could talk about it as a commitment to care for all beings. That's another way of talking about what we call ethics. And we know that many of us follow, when we're looking at ethics, 5 core precepts, which are basically about not causing harm, and then the other side of it is our positive qualities such as care, generosity, and so forth. But we know that the 5 ethical precepts that we hear, if we've been at retreats, at the beginning of the retreats, are number 1, not harming, sometimes extended to or described as not killing. 2nd, not taking that which is not given. And the 3rd through the 5th are having care and trying not to harm in 3 areas where we can very easily harm. The first, sexuality. The 2nd, speech and communication. And the 3rd, substances which shift consciousness. That we can, in each of those areas, be harmed. So what does the practice look like? One thing I want to say is that often the ethical precepts are primarily understood in terms of our own individual behavior. I want to not harm myself. I want to not take that which is not given. I want to have care. And we can use the ethical precepts to both, and I've sometimes worked in groups where we worked with these 5 precepts I remember once for 6 months. And we worked with 1 precept a month. And then we brought them together, for the last month. And the precepts are helpful because they're both behavioral guidelines. They tell us especially what not to do or where to look out. But they also give us really suggestions for where to pay attention. Oh, am I engaging in skillful speech? Oh, skillful speech has guidelines of being truthful. Okay, it looks like I'm exaggerating for the sake of self-image. Okay, Donald, a little bit of mindfulness, what's going on, and so forth. So, and probably for most of us of these teachings, wise speech can be the most significant for us. So one that has, and then some of I've been teaching retreats on wise speech or mindful communication for, I think, almost 20 years. And it's a really important area of practice, and also not always taught so much, not always practiced with clarity and precision so much. Now, one interesting thing is, again, we often think that the ethical precepts are about me getting my personal act together, right? But historically, they were understood in a social sense. It wasn't just about me, it's about others as well. And so, for example, this is from the Buddha, from the Dhammapada. Not to do any evil, cultivate what is wholesome, purify one's own mind and heart. This is the teachings of the Buddha. This is the teaching of the Buddhas. And we know that the Buddha, within his own community, didn't permit the caste system to exist and spoke out against it. And he didn't try to change the larger society, but he did change his own community, right, and looked at that. Interestingly, some of you know, a few hundred years after the Buddha, there was a king named Ashoka who brought Buddhist ethics to much of what we now call India. Listen to this. This were some of the guidelines that Ashoka had for this large part of the world. This was about 250 before the Common Era. One scholar talked about Ashoka as developing a moral society of active social concern, religious tolerance, ecological awareness, the observance of common ethical precepts, and the renunciation of war. Okay? 2,300 years ago. Make America great India again. That just came to me. So listen to some of what was occurring 2,300 years ago with Ashoka. Abolition of the death penalty as not in accordance with the ethical precepts. Provision of medical facilities for all humans and for non-human animals. Medical facilities for non-humans. He commissioned officers to work for the welfare and happiness of the poor and of the aged, 2,300 years ago. Restrictions on the killing of non-human animals for the imperial kitchen. And then with a guideline that in the future there was to be no killing of animals, non-human animals. Again, that's an interpretation of bringing the ethical precepts to the whole society. And the Buddha had also a social sense. He said, this is in terms of the precept on killing, let one not destroy life, nor cause others to destroy life, nor approve of others' killing. Do you hear a social sense there? It's not just about my personal, but it's, what do you do if your tax dollars go to killing? Right? What do you do if your government is harming? Does that come under one's commitment to non-harming? I would say yes. And these interpretations suggest that. If that's so, how do we act ethically? How do we, it's not easy, right? Even if you feel this makes sense and are energized, still then we get into how do we act? How do we act together? Many of you know Thich Nhat Hanh's version of the ethical precepts, which were all socially understood. You may remember the 14 precepts of the order of interbeing that he developed in Vietnam in, I think, 1965-66. Here are two of the precepts. Do not kill, do not let others kill. Ethical practice, right? Another one, do not avoid contact with suffering, or close your eyes before suffering. Do not lose awareness of the existence of suffering in the life of the world. Do not live with a vocation that is harmful to humans and nature. And just another expression of this from Sulak Sivaraksha from Thailand, who I've worked with and got to know, one of the founders of the International Network of Engaged Buddhists, which I worked with for some time. We may not literally steal in our face-to-face interactions, but do we allow the rich countries to exploit the poor countries through the workings of the international banking system and the international economic order? Do we allow industrial societies to exploit agrarian societies, the first world to exploit the third world, the rich to exploit the poor generally? Rather relevant these days, right? And then related to that, the commitment, which I think is there also in the teaching, that all beings matter, right? That we get this in the Metta Sutta, right? May all beings be happy. Out there in the back, one of the signs there, Sabbe Sata Sukhi Hontu. May all beings be happy. Some of you know the chant. So this could be a commitment to non-harming, pursuing justice, stopping harm from happening. And of course we can't act with everything. So what I'll suggest at the end is we find our one piece where we're ready to act. I'll talk more about that. But to have the vision that this is part of our practice. It's not, if we want to do ethical practice, we need to respond in some ways. Stop harm from happening might be to repair harm. I came in on the BART today unexpectedly with Renee Rivera. And we were talking some about this, and Renee said, a lot of my engaged practice now is reparative justice. it's repairing harm, particularly to survivors of sexual assault, and repairing the harm. That can be a whole area of practice. Non-cooperation with systemic harm. Resistance, obviously, to militarism and war. So ethics is a really crucial practice. And, and really, and again, for many of us, it might be to ask, what calls me? How do I have ethics more of a part of my practice? Or maybe it already is there in some way. And then a second area, broad area, really crucial, we could bring under the rubric of meditation and inner work. I'll just mention two areas that I think are really crucial. It's finding ways, and this is pretty obvious, but finding ways to bring difficult emotions into our practice. If I'm feeling depressed by what's happening, let me focus there. If I'm feeling anger, let me practice with the anger. It's very easy when we don't focus on what's there to go into numbness. Anyone feeling that at times? Yeah, very, very easy to go into numbness. And a lot of this really can work actually sometimes better in community. I don't know, maybe another time I could come back. One of the practices I love is a group practice that I learned originally from Joanna Macy. Some of you probably know this. It's called the Truth Mandala. Anyone know the Truth Mandala? It's a powerful practice. I've worked with it in really difficult social times. People gather in a circle. It can be 10 people, it can be 20, it can be 50, it can be 100. Gather in a circle, and it might take an hour, hour and a half, and people form a circle and then have the chance to go in the circle, in the inner part of the circle, which is divided into 4 quadrants. One is for anger, one is for sadness, one is for confusion, and let's see, what is the other? Something important.
Forgetfulness.
And in the middle is for anything that doesn't come in. Yeah, the fourth is, let's see, anger, confusion, sadness. What would be another difficult emotion that I didn't mention? Huh?
Despair?
Yeah, it could be despair.
Contempt.
Huh?
Contempt. Judgment.
Yeah, something like contempt. Anyway, the fourth is a very important one that... Anyway, what do you do?
Fear.
Huh?
Fear?
Yeah, thank you. It was fear. It was fear. I actually have in my study, I have a poster from the Bread and Puppet Theater of Vermont. Anyone know the Bread and Puppet Theater? Wonderful. And it was from one of their shows. It has an image, and the caption is, "The one who set out to study fear." Beautiful program. And so you have those 4 areas. People go into the circle, usually 1 or 2 at a time, and they speak. They go to the quadrant that's linked to the emotion, fear or anger. And you can go to several of them at a time. And they speak to the whole group. And I found this at certain times when I was feeling numb. I found myself doing that ritual in a community, brought out, it took me out of numbness. And in fact, it let me act more. I remember this happened once in, right at the time of the Gulf War. And I had been there, I think it was the first Gulf War, and I had been very active with Buddhist Peace Fellowship, doing a lot of things. And then when the actual war started, I felt numb. But a little bit after, I was part of a training with Joanna, and we had 70 people. We did that ritual, and it took me out of numbness. So it could be different forms of ritual, but how do we could deliberately say, let me bring up things related to my anger, be with them with mindfulness, do that every day, right? Have it be present so that there's not numbness. And there's a whole, we could talk about that, for a whole area, but I think I'll assume that most of us here, that's enough to say. Just attend to the difficult emotions, talk about them with friends, go back into them, experience them. A lot of them might be totally accessible. Anger might be totally, I don't have to try hard to feel anger, but to really to tune into that and bring one's practice to it. Over and over again. With these emotions, it's over and over again. I personally have had 7 10-day retreats. I had one where I had fear the whole time, like 10 or 12, 14 hours a day. Another one, anger, right? And I found from working with them, I have to look at it over and over again, keep on working. And then I'll be brief here because I want to give time. The other inner practice is maintaining joy in the midst of a difficult time. And I'll be brief here, but I was thinking of Emma Goldman. Remember the anarchist activist who said, "If I can't dance, I don't want to be in your revolution." Yeah. Or in the Jewish tradition, there's a little song which I think I'll sing. Some of you may know this. This is about one of the Hasidic rabbis called Nachman of Breslau. Anyone heard of Nachman? Yeah. Anyway, end of the 18th century, Eastern Europe. And this is a song about him. Rabbi Nachman of Breslau used to say, "Friends, do not despair. A difficult time has come upon us. Our joy must fill the air. We must not lose our faith in living. We must not despair. A difficult time is upon us. Our joy must fill the air." That's it. And so, how to find, ways to tune into joy when things are difficult or when there's those emotions, anger and fear and so forth. And I think it's, our meditation gives us a vehicle, and there are ways that we can just tune into our own being, and actually joy and happiness are part of our nature. We don't have to create them. So anyone who's done who's sort of developed in concentration and meditation knows that at a certain level of concentration, bliss and joy just simply arise. They're not so much created by the meditation as they're an inner quality that opens up. So joy is part of our nature. We have to remember that, and tune into it. And we know that music was so key to the civil rights movement, and healthy movements had a lot of joy and so forth. And then last, I'll just finish. Okay, I want to do a little bit more. The importance of listening for what calls you. Is there an area you want to work with? And I think of several people I've worked with who told me, I want to, these are spiritually grounded people, I want to be more active. And I said, okay, a few steps. Name the issue you want to be involved with. And I think of one person. Okay, I want to be involved, help with climate issues. Okay. We'll meet in a week. Do research, or then I think before that I asked, how many hours a week can you devote? 5 hours. 5 hours a week. Okay. We'll meet in 1 week, research places or organizations where you can do 5 hours of climate-related work. She came back, had a few options, chose one of them. That was 3 years ago. She's been going in that since. That's a simple model. You know, just see what calls you, not to do all issues, to do one issue. Okay. And I think I'll close. This sort of brings things together in a way that I think is not obvious. This is from Howard Thurman. People know Howard Thurman? He was African-American theologian and activist who set up the first interracial church in San Francisco in the 1940s. And died in 1980. I never met him. But right in the early 70s, a young man came to him and said, I want to really help the world. What should I do? And this was Howard Thurman's response. I'll finish with this. Don't ask what the world needs. After everything I've said. Don't ask what the world needs. Rather, ask what makes you come alive and go do it. Because what the world needs is people who have come alive. So, thank you, thank you. Yeah, we have some time to talk together. Clark, please.
I first heard you speak, I think in 2004, either the Judgment.
Say a little louder.
I first saw you speak at
Oh, yeah.
the Working with Judgment Day.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe it was the Loving Kindness Retreat. It was one was right after the other in
Yeah.
2004. And you had a red nose then. Do you remember from clown school?
Yeah.
You would sometimes use.
I'm a graduate of the Clown School of San Francisco.
But you seemed like a different person then. And in the like in the Tibetan tradition, there's one of these qualities of awakening is lightheartedness.
Yeah.
And you seem to me like so much more lighthearted now than you were back then. And I just was wondering if maybe you could share, like, how, I guess that's a subset maybe of joy or like a cousin of joy or something. What was your path to being more?
My path to being more lighthearted. Well, clown school played a role. Yeah, and I've brought that in. Another time maybe I could bring my nose. My clown personality is named Garbanzo Bean. And there's a sub-personality named Guru Garbanzo Bean, who answers very, very important spiritual questions badly. I think, I teach on transforming the judgmental mind, and I chose that topic not because it was simply a good topic, but it came out of my own inner work, and having a quite judgmental mind, which can be connected with ethics and seeing what's wrong and right and so forth. The way I teach it is that the judgmental mind isn't per se a problem that needs to be suppressed, but rather it needs to be transformed, and we need to take the insight that can be connected with being judgmental. Okay, that's not right, that's not unjust, what that person did, not okay. That one can be very judgmental about things where one's seeing something very accurately. So you have to transform it. So I think doing my own work there, I think partly just all the meditation over the years, I think thoughts have, it's interesting the way I'm saying this, thoughts are just less around.
Is it like the saying, the sun is always shining, even if it's obscured or even covered by clouds? Like, do you think lightheartedness is an inherent thing, or is it something that needs to be like cultivated?
Yeah, I think both. Yeah, because I think the lightheartedness is just really kind of flows from our general development, and it's connected with joy. I think it's connected with equanimity. which is having a kind of balance no matter what's happening. And because I find that with things happening in the world now, and in my notes, I wanted to be briefer, but I didn't even mention like the USNS Harvey Milk and, all the stuff, the scrubbing of anything related to the Enola Gay. Insane, right? Right. So I think a certain equanimity, for me personally, I think grounding more and more in the body, less being directed by thoughts, which is just a fruit of the practice. And also related to some of the judgmental mind work is really knowing where my own residual material is, which can bring pain. Knowing that more and more, and not it arises. Like in my judgmental mind work, I use the concept of limiting beliefs. Which more a psychological term. We all have limiting beliefs. A lot of them come from childhood. In mine, which are quite common. Two of them are, I don't really belong. This comes from childhood. Another one is, people don't understand me, right? And those get activated sometimes. Anyone relate to those two? Right. And those get activated sometimes, but as I do the inner work and get to know them more and more, I see them way more quickly and can just bring awareness and do some practice with them. And so I think that's part of it. So I think I don't get caught or stuck for that long. And that's a fruit of practice as well. Yeah. But that's the beginning, Clark. Yeah.
Thank you. This has been really helpful because I have been feeling numb and, overwhelmed and all that. And what I realized as you were talking is it's more about a commitment to taking action regardless of the outcome.
Yeah, well, that's right.
Because, I think my culture has instilled in me this sense that I need to solve problems, I need to be part of the solution, I need to, we desire to be on the winning team, to vote for the winning candidate, to be on the right side of history, all these things. And it has left me with this sense of, well, if it doesn't solve something, what's the use?
Right.
Like, what a waste of time. You're
Right.
blowing in the wind, that sort of thing.
Right.
As opposed to what you're talking about, and that is basically a commitment to ethical conduct regardless.
Really, really crucial point, yeah. Were you complete?
Yeah.
Really crucial point. I didn't really bring it out too much. I think the last chapter of my book that's out there is called Committed Action, Non-Attachment to Outcome. Right, and which kind of follows, I think I was inspired originally, there's a line in the Bhagavad Gita, or a phrase, action without attachment to the fruits of one's action. Yeah, and it's just a complex teaching, but basically, it means acting for what is right and good, even when you're not sure that it'll bring about the results. I think really crucial right now because there's so much need for action that's going in the right direction, but we don't know the immediate effects, right? We don't know, and I think a lot of people who've been active over the years had to work with something like that. That's, I think, why I have it as a chapter, because I could really refer to so many people who had some version of that. And they could, some people talk about it as really being aware that we're in it for the long haul, right? And you don't necessarily have results in a month or a year, but that, again, inspired by our practice, we have a vision of caring for all beings. We have a vision of nonviolence. We have a vision of you dismantling some of the oppressive systems, whatever. I think in another talk I sort of talked about a vision of several, quite a number of systems. We have a vision of going beyond racism, of going beyond, patriarchy and so forth, right? And the old models of gender and so forth. And we can have that vision and know that that corresponds actually to our basic nature. And as we find sabe sata sukhi hantu, our hearts, when we're in our awakened awareness, we're connected with all beings, right? And that actually, that's why I think our practice is so crucial, because in a way, we get corroboration of where we're going by touching love in our own experience. Touching love, metta, vast awareness. That tells us this is my basic nature. And so in a sense, it's already there. That could really help with that issue. And then the other thing, I wanted to get this in before we finish. Anyone know the work of Erica Chenoweth? Yeah, really crucial in these times. She's I think still at Harvard, a researcher, and she did research on, I think, 100 nonviolent movements from the 20th century and 200 violent movements. And some of the movements were against violent dictators. That includes like the movement in the Philippines against Marcos, some of the movements in Eastern Europe against the Soviet dictatorship and so forth. And what she found in her research, that when a movement had the active participation of 3.5% of the population or more, 100% success. Remember that. Right? And the only movements that had that were nonviolent movements. Violent movements didn't have that. Nonviolent movements tended to move towards democracy, violent movements towards tyranny. But anyway, just remembering that if there are enough people, then even that success is possible.
Jeff online has a question.
Yeah. Should we take this as the last one, or how are we for time?
See, maybe
Okay,
one or two.
very good.
Hi, Donald.
Hey, Jeff.
Thank you for a great talk. I'm really interested in this topic. I really got the importance of practicing the ethical conduct. It's during my first month-long retreat at Spirit Rock, and we're partway through. And they said, if you'd like, people can take the 8th precept of not eating after the lunch.
Yeah.
And so I decided to do that. They said, but there are snacks in the refrigerator in the kitchen, like eggs and peanut butter and things like that. So I would usually go down and have a boiled egg and some peanut butter or something, minimal. But then as the weeks went on, I got really tired of being hungry all the time after in the evening. And I started one time or two, I would put, peanut butter and honey, 3 eggs, I mean, it was really became sort of a small meal. And
Yeah.
I felt guilty about it. That was like my karma of doing that. And I saw how it really messed with my meditation.
Mm.
That impact. And somebody reported that, or I read in some book, uh, Joseph Goldstein was in an interview with U Pandita and said, "My meditation, I can't, really focus. I'm having a hard time meditating." And U Pandita asked him, "How is your sila? How is your
Yeah.
purity, or in
Yeah.
your?" And that was the question he needed to focus on his own conduct. And
Yeah.
so practicing truth, non-harm, all those things really have a direct effect on our own consciousness, for sure, not to mention other people's lives. So, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. That's very helpful. Yeah, just the yeah, and it may we can do this on our own, but it may take I don't know, finding a friend or a group of 2 or 3 people and checking in. Like in that group that I worked with, we met I think every 2 weeks for 6 months. And checked in followed one precept and talked to each other. I think, again, community can be really important for supporting the practice. And again, I'm not so much about advertising, but there is in the book I have there's an extended chapter on ethical practice and how we understand it in a larger social context as well. And I think a community. Having a community to explore this can be really, really helpful. So we're not entirely on our own. Yeah. If I could come back next week and we could have it be assignment for the next week. Thanks, Jeff.
Any more questions?
Yeah.
That was lovely, Donald. I'm so glad I got to come today and listen and hear amongst you all.
Speak up.
I know we only have a few minutes left, but one thing that I wrote down.
Just a little louder, maybe for the mic.
One thing that I wrote down. You said attend to your negative emotions.
Mm-hmm.
I know that's a big subject. Could you just speak on it briefly?
About working with the negative emotions?
Yeah, your own.
Yeah. Yeah, of course, in our meditation practice, this is a central dimension. And one of the glories of meditation is that we can identify, okay, there's anger there now, and I can explore it. So part of it, when the anger or the fear or the difficult emotion is in the workable range, because sometimes they're, when I work with people, I have a 10-point scale like the Olympic divers, 1 to 10. And I say, if it's a 9 or a 10, I define that as more or less overwhelming. Then we can't really bring mindfulness to it. But when it's less than that, we can. And just to bring mindfulness to anger, feel what it's like in the body. Stay with it for a while. One of the interesting things about anger, for example, you stay with it for a while, sometimes it opens up to sadness. Many psychologists say anger is a cover emotion with sadness beneath it. When I did my long retreat where I looked at anger for like about 15 hours a day for 10 days. Maybe that helped with lightheartedness. Do I seem like an angry person? But there it was. And what I found when I really stayed with the anger, beneath it, I sometimes would feel sadness. And beneath the sadness, I would sometimes touch into love, which makes some sense. And when I've researched anger, I found that there were activists who basically say, my activism results, my anger comes out of love. And Dr. King said that the heart of our movement is the transformation of anger. And for him, it was actually to be in the movement coming out of love. It's a fruit. We can't sort of produce it, but what I found is just being mindful over time, with repetition really crucial, the anger would be processed and transformed. And that something like that is true for the other difficult emotions, like fear or grief. Just have to hang out with it. Probably, I can think of, I had once a 4-week grief retreat, because I was on retreat for 4 weeks 6 days after my mother died unexpectedly. And it was just grief for 30 days, right? But just hanging out with it and seeing what gets in the way. That's a formula for skillful work with difficult emotions. So that we can work with it, but some of it during the day would just be to name it. You know, if it's happening during the day, name it, see if you can touch into it. Another practice is to deliberately bring it up at the end of the day, bring it up, and then be with it for a while when it's in the workable range. So that's a beginning, really, but really a crucial practice generally and for our time. Yeah.
Thank you, Dylan.
Thank you, thank you.
Will you be around? Will you stick around for a little while in case other people have questions? I saw some hands up.
I will be around, and I'm also intending, if there's a lunch group, to go to lunch.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, and I'll just say, also outside there I have my upcoming schedule. I'm actually doing an online day-long retreat in August on connecting inner and outer transformation. It'll be a whole day, I think August 3rd, online. And then there's some other things. The day-long on transforming the judgmental mind is on at Spirit Rock, July 13th, hybrid, both online and in person. And if you go to that, I have groups. There's possibility of being part of an ongoing group after that. And then, so schedule, sign-up sheet if you want to stay in touch, some books. I also brought a short little card for Renee Rivera's upcoming retreat after meeting Renee on BART. So that's there, and a reading list. Okay.
Excellent.
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you. Do you have a dedication of merit that you'd like to offer, or should we use our regular?
I can do one.
Okay,
Please.
Please.
May our time together be of benefit to us. May our time together be of benefit to all those in our lives, in our own circles. May our time together in our practice be of benefit beyond our own circles to all beings. May our time together in our practice benefit all beings, knowing that we are part of all beings. Yay!